so many reasons, but the obvious one being that the distance between Khartoum and Kampala is not very, very wide. And that's why whatever happens in Khartoum is of interest to us here in Kampala. We know that not so long ago, I think about a week ago, a civil conflict emerged out of the city of Khartoum between two factions, one led by General Abdel Fatah, that is the Sudanese military force, and the other led by General Mohammed Dagalog, and that is the Rapid Support Forces. You might have an interest to know their history, that the role they played in the 2013 war in Darfur, where there were a militia used by the government at the time to, suppress, certain forces they're under. So today we convene to evaluate what exactly is the historical context of this conflict, but also what remedies do we think we can evaluate moving forward. And to put all this into perspective is a panel of distinguished and immaculate citizens of this country. That is now my pleasure to introduce to you our viewers. And in no particular order, the only lady on the show this afternoon is Dr. Sarah Bireete, the Executive Director of Center for Constitutional Governance. Doctor, thank you for sparing the time.
Thank you, Moses, and good afternoon, viewers.
Thank you. From Makerere University College of Humanities is Professor Ndebesa Mwambutsya, who is a professor of political science at Makerere University and also a panelist this afternoon. Professor, karibu.
Asante. And good evening, viewers and listeners out there.
Thank you very much for sparing the time. The third panelist, we hope that we can be joined by one more later on, is General Mugisha Muntu, the founder of the Alliance for National Transformation, but also his reputation really precedes him. General, we are very humbled to have you.
Pleasure is mine. Good evening, dear viewers.
All right, thank you very much. General, just to kick us off right away, the United Nations Special Envoy to Sudan reported that the toll as of today stands at around 200, but also there are massive casualties that have been, registered ever since this conflict emerged. But I think for the benefit of our viewers, what is the historical context of this conflict? The background, really.
Well, it's unfortunate that the Sudanese people are going through what they are going through right now. Coups have been a problem in this part of the world, mostly on the African continent. Overall, in the whole world, I think since 1950, there is an estimate of about 486 coups that have ever happened. Out of those, 214 attempted and successful coups, about 485 or 6 globally. Of those, 214 have been on the African continent, of which 106 were successful. Sudan alone has had 17 attempted coups since 1950, of which 6 succeeded, including this last one of, I think, a year ago or so. The only other countries that have had more coups is Burkina Faso, which had 8 successful coups out of 9 attempted ones, and Nigeria also, which has had 8 successful coups. Sudan, since 1956, when they got independence, they had their first coup in 1958. And since that time, there has been turbulence within Sudan. Of course, the internal contradictions. One, Sudan was part of Egypt, and when the British left, before they left, Sudan was more or less given autonomy, political autonomy. And indeed, 58, 2 years after getting independence, they had their first coup, and then followed by many attempted and successful coups. Out of the 17 attempted ones, 6 of which have been successful. So you can see in a span of about 65 years to have 17 attempted coups, 6 of them successful. You can see that the history has been, riddled with the turbulence. So basically the conclusions one can make, therefore, is that there's no culture of good governance. There's no culture of democratic practices. Unfortunately, a few years back, I can't recall exactly how many, Sudan itself had to be split into two. South Sudan now is on its own. Maybe one would have hoped that the North would stabilize after that. But the current internal contradictions clearly show that they still haven't managed their internal politics to the extent where they can be stable and concentrate on developing their economies and also build foundation for good governance. It's unfortunate, but that's a reality that we are dealing with.
All right, thank you very much. Doctor, when you listen to General, the way he describes Africa and its history in terms of conflict is in fact embedded in Uganda's preamble of the Constitution. Our history as a country, but also as a continent, has been characterized by political and constitutional instability. But just to draw it back into the context of the two groups here, I don't know, how does a paramilitary group, the Janjaweed, that was a militia that was used by a legitimate government, used to fight the war in Darfur, and then somehow managed to find itself being recognized by a government? I don't know, just the perspective of the conflict as it stands today.
Yeah, briefly, before I get into the specifics of the Rapid Support Forces and Sudan's General Army, rival and now civil war, I think it's important to note that, one, Africa as a continent has largely failed on its democratization journey. And some people, I don't know whether it's out of really losing hope, are beginning to think that the democracy is not suited for Africa, instead of seeing the problem that we have a population that wants democracy, but in amidst scarcity of democrats. So I don't know why, and then maybe General and Professor will tell us, I don't know why most of the time we have crooks in leadership positions in power, as compared to other parts of the world. Whereas in the other parts of the world, it's an exception for crooks to get to power. In Africa, it seems to be the norm. And you have people that do not even possess any single characteristic of being a democrat dominating power. And these are some of the things we must address, the root causes of that. That we have a system that is always manipulated to put crooks at the top. So when you have that challenge of failed democratization, so it's characterized by the politics of exclusion, and that's the heart of Sudan's long-term conflict. The ethnical divisions, the exclusion in most parts of the country. By 2003, there was almost conflict in every part of Sudan, be it Darfur, be it the south, be it the east. There was a rebel group in every part of Sudan, and the main cause was discrimination and the politics of exclusion. The same applies to DRC. But before I get to DRC, so you have Sudan's instability rooted in the politics of exclusion and ethnic discrimination that leads to extreme poverty and the fight for resources. So that's what led to the rise of the secession debates in Darfur, where then Bashir created the Janjaweed militia to fight against the secession driven by the ethnic division and the, extreme discrimination. The Janjaweed as a militia was able to help Sudan. Bashir diffused tensions, although not successfully, and he killed a lot of people, created crimes against humanity. And in 2011, 2012, they were upgraded to what we have now as the Rapid Support Forces. initially to help Bashir misrule Sudan. During the uprisings in 2019, led by the pro-democracy forces of the professional groups, women, youth, workers, largely driven by the economic crisis, the rapid support forces also rebranded themselves as pro-democracy. and the movements trusted them. When you see the statements they were making at the time when they later allied with the military to overthrow Bashir. So you have a people's revolution in 2019 hijacked by the extreme, fascist forces, including former Janjaweed. And they capture power. The failure of that revolution, the unfinished revolution, or the uprising, which hasn't materialized to its intended objectives of socio-economic transformation of Sudan, was because of the same characters. Burhan and Dagalog conspire. And they keep, hoodwinking the civilian government. Overthrow it, reinstate it, overthrow it. And now, just 1 month or a few days to hand over of civilian rule, then they break out in this chaos. The current chaos in 3 days, with over 280 the deaths, about 287 as per this morning, and the injured are above 2,000. There is no water or electricity in Khartoum, and the fighting is spreading to, 3 more towns, and you have homesteads running out of food supplies. So this is the current crisis.
Yeah.
And they will prolong the proposed handover back to civilian rule, because now the pro-democracy forces have gone back to, square zero, because they have nowhere to stand. The prime minister is just now like an unstate actor in his house. He has completely lost state power and control. And then you have, a whole country in a mess.
Very complicated. Professor, just how delicate is this situation? Because there has been an arms embargo by the United Nations against so many countries that are surrounding Sudan. I think Somalia, I'm not sure, but their arms embargo has not yet been uplifted, but also many other countries within the region or that are surrounding Sudan. But also there is a mood around the uplifting of some of these embargoes. What this means is that Sudan could have more access to military weapons. So in the mix of all this conflict and countries having their embargoes uplifted, how delicate does it make the situation? But also, Doctor spoke about the agreement between the militia group and the civilian group that I think was a 39-month agreement that now the militia group is trying to abuse, sort of. So I just put first into perspective how delicate this situation is, but also the agreement in itself.
Thank you. Before I come to those last questions, I think let's first give a wider perspective, historical and wider perspective of such a political and security instability within Sudan, which has ramifications in the whole of Africa, but mainly the Horn and the Great Lakes region. First of all, we note that Sudan, like most African countries, if not all, is a post-colonial state. And these post-colonial states are not yet nation states. They are still, in the language of the 19th century, politician in Europe, Metternich, I think, they are...
Client state?
No, they are just geographical expressions. The challenge is not so much of democracy. I think the challenge is more of state formation, state and nation formation. it is lacking in these post-colonial states. Is it impossible to form a state? No, it is not. Only that it has been mismanaged and misgoverned. And at the center of this misgovernance is governing the means of coercion, the security forces, the military. It has been abused. And this now is at the heart of the confusion you see in the Sudan. Because if you have to build a modern state, however much there are those challenges that you will find, because Sudan has all the ingredients of sectarianism and divisionism, in the sense that they have got two races, they have two major religions, Christianity and Islam, and they have got very many ethnic groups. That doesn't mean that they cannot be welded together into a nation state. But there is this central institution called the military, which needs to be woven, which needs to be constructed by principled leadership that has public interests at heart and is determined to create a nation. So the question of the military now is what is happening in Sudan, which is happening in some of these other areas in the region, is that you have got a shadow military, the official form of military, and the shadow military, just as much as you have the shadow state and the real state. The shadow here I'm talking about is not opposition. No, within the same government, you find a shadow government and a shadow military. Now, the official one can be held accountable by different organs of the state at the horizontal level or by the citizens. But this shadow one, you cannot hold it accountable. You don't know how to manage it. You don't know where its command and control structures are. So when Bashir, because of self-interest, serving self-interest, and not having the public interest at heart, he created a shadow security apparatus that complicated the issues in Sudan, because you can't hold something informal accountable. Just like in these other countries, we have got informal government, informal personalities that you cannot hold accountable. So Bashir, because he wanted to remain in power, he was there for 30 years, you can imagine. Because of his greed, he wanted to form another militia, another army, another center of security power, of military power, to counteract the former one. And therein lies the problem. Remember, by the way, both these protagonists, Bashir and, no, not Bashir, is it who?
Mohammed
Mohammed and the other one, they are both now Muslims. At least we can't say it is because of Christianity. And
They
I
are
think,
also both Arab.
and they are both of the Arab extraction, although they are Africans actually, but they call themselves Arabs. Anyway, so the question is not a race, the question is not a religion, the question is power struggles among these military fellas who have no Sudan at heart. Another challenge which I must mention here and we shall discuss later is that Bashir's other strategy of remaining in power invited the military into economy. These fellows are not only warlords, they are gold warlords, they are economic warlords. So when he invited the military into another shadow economy, they will have to fight tooth and nail to protect their economy. And wherever the military has been involved in running the economy, especially the shadow economy, we have had challenges because this military will always want to be in power, not because they want good governance and protecting the integrity of the state or defending it, but because they want to use that coercive power to protect their business interests. So it is happening in Sudan because Bashir involved them. Both the other militia leader is, I'm told, he sells gold and all that, but even the other so-called former commander, he's also involved. It happened in Egypt, the same story. The military is involved in direct business transactions. It is happening in Miami. It is still taking place. So if any other country has involved the military into involvement in business running, they will always want to remain in power in order to protect that business empire. Now, the two warlords, who are also economic lords, they are now clashing in order to protect their business empire and business interests in the region. But this is complicated by also the shadow state, the shadow military vis-a-vis the formal government. So your question was, how come that within the same region they are not resolving the problem, or what?
No, my question just precisely was that there is an ongoing mood to uplift the arms embargo from, for example, the Central African Republic, and also I think Somalia. So should these countries be allowed to begin either procuring or possessing some of these weapons, how then does it make the already fragile situation in Sudan even worse?
The question of embargo to me is neither here nor there, because they will still get the arms anyway, one way or the other. There is across in the Sahel region, you have got the ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They have arms. Where are they getting them from? The people get the arms across just in Libya. You know, Libya is border Sudan. Yeah. There is gun running. They can always get the guns. In Somalia, they have been guns. Whether you lift the embargo or don't lift the embargo, the guns have been there. So these small arms, you don't need even to load them. You can just carry them on in your chikapu, in your bag, and go across. So that is not the issue generally. The issue is to find ways and means of intervening without interfering. Maybe by regional groups or international groups, to address the question of one arm of the state, the military. How do we remove the military from political competition? Because the moment the military is given that space in military in political competition, but likewise again, they are given space to carry out businesses. If you are doing businesses, please resign from the army and go and do business. But you see, they are taking advantage. They are abusing their position as security people who have means of coercion to carry out illegal shadow businesses, which they also want to control. And then they are being abused by the politicians who, one way or the other, want to take advantage of the means of coercion. So in the whole of Africa, we have to address the question of militarism, militarism as an ideology.
Let me bring General right there on the aspect of militarism.
Please.
General, at least even your title says it all, but also your experience, you participated in a good part of the NRA war. How possible is it, as we examine the Omar Bashir factor, how possible is it that, legitimate or not legitimate, but a president of a country finding the need to form a paramilitary group to fight wars on behalf of the government? How does that come to exist? Is it an indictment on the national army, or is it for just sinister and clandestine motives?
Specifically to Sudan, as I had already indicated, you can see that they've had a history of turbulence, where the army has, engaged in so many attempted coups, as I've already indicated, 17 of them, 6 of which have been successful in a span of 65 years, because they failed to resolve the issues of state formation, like Professor is talking about. Because all countries that have failed to create the geographical expressions and translate them into nation states have faced a number of issues, including coups. In the whole of Africa, out of 54 countries, there have been attempted coups in 45 since 1950. And of the 45 attempted coups, they have been successful in 36. That's more than half. So, and there is no way there can be a coup unless there is failure at the level of managing political contradictions in a country. So coups come in when there is failure in the area of politics, and therefore the political elite. In countries where you had leaders who had the skills, but also who had the heart and desire to build their countries, their focus being on building countries, like Nyerere in Tanzania is one of the most successful countries. I mean, successful leaders in building a nation out of the geographical expression of a country. Tanzania is a nation. Whatever mistakes they have been making, at least Nyerere crafted it into a nation.
And even Kaunda.
And also Kaunda, and they can also see how Kaunda, when he lost the elections, he simply said, you know, he'll move on. I mean, the intelligence services had asked him what they should do.
Actually, Mobutu mocked him.
You know,
he said, "How can you organize a direction and lose it?" He couldn't believe it.
So the nature of the leaders, the initial
the immediate incumbent also
Rungu. So they are built, country. In a sense, they have built a culture.
Yeah.
Another country like Botswana, which has been steady. The first president, Sir Serese Khama, because of the ethnic dynamics, the Tswana are the largest, 80%, and he was a king. Sir Serese Khama could have decided to possibly turn Botswana into, you know, a kingdom and continue ruling, but he decided to build a modern state. And you can see the stability of Botswana in terms of the steadiness of how they run their economy, in their politics. Okay, they have not had a transition from one party to another. That's a test they need to go through. But the foundation was firm because of the initial leader. So the initial leaders and the political elite in each country literally influenced the nature of politics that followed thereafter. The leaders who didn't have the depth of understanding of how they can craft a nation out of a geographical expression or just a country, those who didn't have the skills, or those who never cared about the country, putting country first, and they more or less advanced their interests above the interests of the country. Instability had to set in. However, there's also another factor, like when there was a Cold War, because most of the coups, there was a heightened extent of coups during the East-West conflict. But that one, at the same time, if the political elite were focused on countries and building those countries along the interests of the people, it would also have been possible to withstand external manipulation. Because Tanzania, again, is another example. Tanzania was the leader of the frontline states. There's nothing the South Africans and the Rhodesians and the Portuguese would not have done to overthrow or to destabilize the Tanzanian state, because they had all the fighters for the frontline liberation movements, South African, Mozambique, as well as Zimbabwe, or had bases in Tanzania. In spite of all that, the late President Nyerere, because he was focused on building a nation, because he was not focused on advancing himself as an individual, managed to build a national army, managed to build a strong civil service, build a nation, really. Tanzanians look at themselves as Tanzanians. They are proud of being Tanzanians first and foremost. They have got 120 ethnic groups. They have got a significant, the divide between Christians and Muslims is almost equal. In spite of all that, the external intervention that there could have been to destabilize Tanzania, he built it, and you can see it as an example. So the failure is in the political elite. It's not that it is not possible to build these countries and they become nations. It's not that it's not possible to, because Sudan, even if there are different ethnic groupings in Sudan, as far as I'm concerned, could have been the best country to reflect what Africa would have been. Because Sudan has got, is multi-racial, the Arab African, it was multi-ethnic, was also multi-religious. So if they had had a political elite that was advanced in thinking, in thought, and wanted to build Sudan to be representative of the different interests of the people who are within Sudan. It would have, if it had been a successful story in Sudan, there is no way any other African country would not have learned from that to say, if Sudan can do it, then we can also do that. But there has been absolute failure. The first failure was the division of Sudan, South, North, based on ethnic Christian South, Muslim North. Now, in the North now, 90% of the North, I think, now is Muslim, Islamic. Yeah. But you can see still the contradictions. On the eastern part, there are groups which are fighting. Darfur, one hopes that one hopes that this kind of conflict, as we see today, that will not spill over into Darfur and in the areas around Port Sudan, because there was also another group that literally had wanted to secede and become an autonomous region. One hopes that those contradictions are not going to escalate to a point where the North can also split apart further. So to resolve the issue of these fights, there have to be a significant number of political actors within the political elite who have got the skills to work together in spite of whatever differences they may have. Real, imagined, or artificial. If they don't develop those skills, we will not have seen an end to whatever conflicts have ended up ravaging them as we see it now.
I don't think myself would be much more to do with skills. It is skills. The norms, the normative framework.
Yes.
They need to have the norms of public service, of the greater good.
Yes.
Because the skill, how come they have the skills of manipulating everybody, manipulating the military? So the skills of governance, they have them. What they lack is the norms. It is within their software to know that you exist as a public entity representing the public to serve the public, not to serve the self. So there is that problem of people wanting to serve their self-interest, creating an army. Bashir knew that he was creating a dangerous army.
No, but you see, for him, Bashir was after his own survival. Yeah, I don't think he cared about Sudan.
His norms.
So it's a question of consciousness, first consciousness, to a level where you advance the country above self, first and foremost. I was taking that for granted. I was assuming. But anyway, it's a factor. But beyond the consciousness, there must also be skills. Statecraft is a skill. Bringing people of competing interests and you harmonize them is a skill. Much as Nyeri had the consciousness of wanting to create a country, a nation state out of a country that Tanzania is, out of 120 ethnic groups and different religious groups, to craft it and succeed required skills. Political skills, management skills. There's no doubt about that. So the consciousness is a critical factor and it's the beginning part of it. But we have many people in all these countries where we've had these problems, at least at the level of expression, all of them want one country. All of them want to develop. All of them want to see transparency. All of them talk about good governance. So why do they end up in a mess? Unless, of course, their expressions are simply deception.
That is it.
If it is a deception, then there is a problem.
That is it.
And if it's a deception, then there is a problem. But beyond that, even if there is that consciousness, like we find in most of these countries, you find people within the NGO sector, people within the academia, people within the business community want to see stability in their countries. But I think there's also a problem of lacking the skills. People who can craft these different interest groups and also create hope in them. That, you know what, the future can be better than where they are at or what their history has been like. And also to do certain things in a short period of time that they are able to build the necessary trust and say, yes, this team of political elite in leadership seem to be walking the talk. And therefore, once they build the trust, then they can start building stability. If you build, for example, a meritocracy in terms of public service, and everybody recognizes that it doesn't matter what religion I am from, it doesn't matter what gender I am, it doesn't matter which ethnic group I'm coming from. I've been interviewed, I have succeeded, I have got a job, and I'm delivering services. And you find that everybody within the country is doing that. That builds trust. I can tell you the country rallies around that kind of political elite. So there has to be a meeting point for where the people in whichever country is as unstable as Sudan is now, to that realization. And they start doing things in that regard. Now, to the question, unfortunately, I didn't dwell on it so much. Bashir just wanted to survive. Darfur wanted to go. He wanted to maintain the cohesion of Sudan, of course, even under his dictatorship. And it's not that he wanted to maintain cohesion in Sudan so that it can be an advantage in developing Sudan. Nothing. I understand when he was arrested, I don't know how many, they found, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and other currencies in his house. Sudan has got, it's an oil producing country. I was wondering, I just looked at the figures. Their GDP is 21 billion United States dollars. It's even lower than ours. Yeah. I had thought that it was higher than ours. This is just 21 billion United States dollars. Of course, there was the conflict down south.
That figure has to be checked.
Yeah, yeah.
Sudan has a higher GDP.
You can check it. You can check it.
North Sudan.
Check it. Sudan.
Check North Sudan.
North Sudan. Khartoum. Check it out. I was surprised when I looked at it.
It has a higher GDP than Uganda.
That's what I thought. You can check it out, and then we rectify the impression. So
34 billion as of 2021.
34.
It has come down.
It is still lower than ours.
Yeah, lower than ours. 34 billion. The figure I looked at maybe was around 2018 or something like that. So Bashir wanting to survive, the internal contradictions which they failed to resolve, the break-off of the South. I think there was fear that Darfur could have easily fallen off. Then there was another ethnic group on the eastern side. I don't remember their name, but they also were fighting to secede.
Yeah.
And the Nuba Mountains. They're also trying to secede. So I think that's why it must have been beyond the capacity of the Sudanese National Army to fight on all those fronts. Yeah. And therefore, creating a militia force. But then, what beats me to understand is the after Darfur settled, why they didn't work to integrate it or have it under one centralized command. It is a big mistake to have 2 different forces or 3 different forces, and each one having its own autonomous command. It doesn't have a centralized command, and all of them are almost equally armed, because it seems, I don't know, it's quite surprising to find a militia that is as well armed as that group. I was just looking at their capacity. It's almost like an army. Yeah. How on earth can you have 2 armies in one country? And you don't even get this kind of crisis that they are having. Now, from the fallout, I understand, I have not looked at the depth of it, that there had been an agreement that it needs to be integrated. Yeah. And the conflict arose from the timing, that the National Army had wanted them to be integrated within 2 years. Yeah. And the force, what is it called? So what?
The Rapid
Support Force wanted it to be straight over 10 years. Yeah. It's a problem. Yeah. So we'll just wait and see how they resolve that. But the question beyond now, the military, even when they resolve that, they'll have to be able to solve their political problems. Yeah. If they don't do that, they'll just keep having coups.
I agree with you, General. Doctor, let's evaluate the capacity of IGAD. The member states, the heads of these member states had a Zoom meeting and agreed that there must be a ceasefire, but also certain heads of states like Mheshimiwa William Ruto were deployed to oversee a mediation process. I don't know, the capacity of IGAD in trying to forge a way forward, does it have capacity or it is, I don't know? It will be
I think
overlooked.
we need to look at the capacity of Africa, Africa states, and the Africa regional groupings to resolve conflicts. Previously, when the likes of Jonas Savimbi and the rest were fighting, and then maybe at the time, General and the team went to the bush, all that a rebel leader needed was a call to BBC to announce that there is a rebellion.
Yeah.
And then the conflict entrepreneurs, the military people selling military hardware, would look for you using BBC links. And because they are selling arms and assess your capacities, and if you have a chance, give you arms and you will pay when you capture power. The trends have changed to now the regional groupings, then a failed mediation. You can look at the Great Lakes region, for example, look at the DRC. How many mediation teams have we had? You have a team after another, you have a team after another, you have, continuous conflict. So it's like institutionalizing conflict in a way. I'm not saying that it is an effort that we don't need, but it has largely been ineffective. So I would like to look at the situation. I used to admire ECOWAS and ECOMOG at the times of Basanjo and the rest. ECOMOG would give you a deadline. Yeah. We don't want a coup. Hand over power to civilians, so we are going to hit the air out of you. And it was effective. So I wish these regional groupings could move to that extent to say, these are our agreements, these are our protocols, this is our governing framework. We don't want coups or civil wars. If you disagree, you must be able to resolve your disagreements peacefully. Once you take up arms, then you have taken up arms against the region, and we shall descend on you. In the absence of that, how many people have negotiated peace in both North and South Sudan? Do we have peace there? No.
Unfortunately, just information.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Unfortunately for ECOWAS, Nigeria, whose army was the backbone of the ECOMOG,
Is in disarray.
Yes.
got internal problems.
Internal challenges.
So
yes.
Right now, they don't have
an
army which can read the Riot Act.
They don't have
Because at that time, if they read the Riot Act to any country there, you know that they would move the troops. And they'd be able to come and sort you out.
Yeah.
But right now, they are so sucked in their own internal conflicts.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah. But we can take the good lessons from what used to be. The East African community has been struggling with the East African standby force, which is largely on paper. Yeah. So to me, that is the capacity we need to build. To say that you will go by the regional framework. In the absence of that, the regional framework and the national constitutions, in the absence of that, we shall come and sort you out.
Then Doctor, just to evaluate that, then how do you compare that response vis-a-vis the principle of sovereignty? Could the two be clashing at some point, or where is the gray area? Because can't a country claim the principle?
You see,
sovereignty,
Moses, sovereignty does not give you power to kill and butcher your citizens.
That's true.
Human rights are universal. Once you have, every nation almost has citizens stuck in Khartoum. Yeah. Yesterday, the head of EU delegation was attacked in his home. Everybody's involved. Yeah. We have people going for Mecca that are stuck in Khartoum. We have 30 nationals living in Khartoum that are stuck, and we are monitoring their safety. So as you cause chaos and mess up each other, you are messing up nationals of other citizens. But also no country has an authority to butcher its citizens. So once your lives are concerned, then everybody is universally concerned.
Yeah.
And under the spirit of integration, then why are we saying we want to integrate with each other? Sudan is a member of the international conference on the Greater Lakes region. I think it was applying to join East African community. And East African community.
But maybe we can borrow also a doctrine of UN responsibility to protect.
Yes.
So the African states have the responsibility to protect African citizens.
And actually, it's international. The responsibility to protect is international.
Ah, okay.
It's not just the UN. Yeah, it's international. Everybody has a responsibility. States, first of all, have a primary responsibility to protect their citizens. But also the international community has a responsibility to make sure that, everybody is protected.
Yeah.
So under those premises, IGAD has tried over time, and maybe briefly on the origin of IGAD. IGAD originally was formed to fight locusts.
To fight desertification.
Desertification, and then later locusts. They dealt with locusts and later metamorphosed into conflict as another warning system. So the question you need to ask first for IGAD is, where were they? Do they have mechanisms to detect and prevent conflict? Because that's their primary mandate. And they have been an overseer in Sudan, North, and in South.
All the countries in IGAD
Yes.
have Sudan is unstable.
Yes.
Ethiopia has internal problems.
So where is the early warning system?
Somalia has problems.
Problems, Eritrea, and the rest. What is the early warning system of IGAD? And once that has failed, so this one of, reacting, being reactionary, conflict, we are moving in, so and so is flying over, you are negotiating ceasefire on the phone, and then the people say, no, you have agreed to ceasefire, that like the rapid support forces. When they immediately agreed to that UN negotiated ceasefire for 24 hours for civilian evacuation, then the General Army of Sudan said, no, you are hiding behind ceasefire to rearm. So we are not going to agree. We must finish you. And the citizens are caught in between. When you go under the UN Charter, the UN Charter attempts in its Chapter 7 to set out rules of war. Safe passage for civilians, safe passage for media, safe passage, for non-combatants, and how you should fight if you must fight. But these countries throw this under the table all the time. So for me, once, the co-panelists have talked about it, once you do not have the basics of how a nation should be, and how do these basics come about? First is through the sovereignty instrument, which is normally the constitution or the grand norm. Then you establish values and systems coupled with institutions to protect these values and systems. And you have everybody being held or forced to obey whatever is nationally agreed. It is said that if men were angels, then there will be no need for laws. But since we are not angels, can we have those basics as countries in Africa? That these are do's, these are don'ts, and they are watchdogs who are enabled to function, and nobody is above the law. We are talking about the situation of Sudan. Unfortunately, we have an emerging situation in Uganda, similar to Sudan. You have now a general who is always violating the constitution, now passing out cadres. We are going towards, we are walking in the footsteps of Sudan, and we are just watching.
Please, General. Please, General.
I think the unfortunate thing we face as an African people or Africans in African countries, at times you get the feeling that there is no way you can build democracy. Because to build democracy, you have to have Democrats. I think we make a lot of assumptions that we have people who are democratic-minded. I think there's a big deficit in regard to that. We talk about it, but we are not it. That's one dilemma that we face.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the problem again we have is that even if we were to forego democracy like some countries have, but concentrate on national development, then one would have said that, okay, we can wait for a country to evolve until it reaches that point where it can be democratic. If you saw effort in terms of developing the countries, as we have seen some places like Singapore, like South Korea, like China, like Malaysia, those like Vietnam, those countries were never democratic at the initial point, but they concentrated on building the countries. Intentionally.
Yeah.
Now, we have gone through phases when we were in that way, because we have had one-party states. We have also had military dictatorships. We have also had autocrats. So even when we have non-democratic governments, we still are not able to build the countries. I think it's the most unfortunate thing.
I can add on
the issue of our, I think really we need to keep learning lessons from they're just simple things, and you can't decipher how people who are in power, even those who are not necessarily in power, but who could be speaking, because, you know, alerting a nation to potential danger is very, very important. You see, in a country like ours, I keep raising this question whenever I have an opportunity. You have a general in uniform. It's a simple thing. There's a law. Don't engage in politics as long as you are in uniform. Retire fast. It's just simple as that. It has been practiced. But you find that at all levels, for those who are supposed to act, none is acting. And you can't even know what the problem is.
Yes.
The commander-in-chief doesn't act. The Ministry of Defense, UPDF, doesn't act. Parliament doesn't act. And everybody is like, everything is okay. You know, what does that signal? That either we are like, I think maybe we now qualify completely to be a banana republic.
Have we resigned?
There is no way you can have a situation of that nature and you find all institutions that are supposed to address a question like that completely paralyzed. And then the national consciousness that you have a population in regard to a question like that, which is really a simple question. Really, it's a simple question. If the national consciousness was of a nature that people would be simply saying, just act. You find institutions like religious leaders, you find like people in civil society, educational institutions, everybody saying, no, that's a no-go area. But abnormal things have been normalized. And whenever countries are sliding towards a problem, is why you find that abnormalities have been normalized and people take things, that's okay. I think where we are is not good.
Yeah.
Let me follow in that question framework and also make comments. First of all, regional groupings and intervention, I think it will not take us far. Why? Because I will still go back on the question of ideas and principles and values and norms, which are unwritten rules. Now, Bashir was indicted by the ICC.
Yeah.
But he continued coming here in Kampala. There is a time he ran away from South Africa. They were about to arrest him. AU didn't mind, and he was attending AU meetings. You find somebody has come to power in a military coup, and the AU says no military coup, but all of a sudden that very person is allowed to be the chairman of AU. When he came into power, through a military coup, this man of Egypt became a chairman, you know. You find this fella of Equatorial Guinea, the man who has the vice president is his son.
Nguema.
Yeah? The way he's messing up that country with a lot of oil, but...
We are guarding him. UPDF
no, he became even the chairman of AU. You know, I admire Nyerere when he refused Idi Amin to be chairman of AU, and he said, I'm not coming to Kampala to attend AU meeting because there is Idi Amin.
The baboon is sharing.
Yes. So if, for example, Bashir had been discouraged or had been even arrested in one of these capitals, I think some people in Sudan would have thought twice and say, by the way, we might follow Bashir if we start messing up like this. But AU has no principled ideas for which they stand for, and they are ready to implement. So, this IGAD, the South African community, whatever, have not come up with the principle of good governance. Incidentally, it is now almost it's about 13 years since the good governance protocol was crafted, was drafted, and handed over to the Secretariat, the East African Community Secretariat. The Council of Ministers and the Summit have refused to ratify good governance because they fear that the principles and articles of the good governance will be used by the citizens to hold these leaders accountable. So, how will people mediate in a conflict which has got sources and roots in poor governance, go and tell the others to behave? They will tell you, but even you are not behaving. What are you talking about? Because the problem of Sudan and this, what we call ethnicity and region and racism, actually is not an issue of citizens wanting to be different or whatever. It is an issue of failure to create equality of these different social categories and ethnic and racial categories. If you have good governance principles and you go by them, there will be less attraction by these different groups to secede. And by that, you will not attract in the military to come and intervene because you have put your house in order. So, AU has failed to implement its principles of good governance, has failed to call to order those who are messing up. East African community is the same. East African community cannot call to order any of its component parts to come to order when they are also misbehaving in the same manner. There is no way. Now you can see how they are adding in. How do you bring in Somalia? Somalia is in a state of crisis. There is no governance you can talk about. So was South Sudan. So is even Congo, DRC. And you simply say, you come and join the club. We are going to have a club of what also the 18th century politicians in Europe called, I think it was also another politician who said, you are forming an unholy alliance. And I'm not going to join you because you are forming an unholy alliance. We are going to have an alliance of authoritarianism, and they are going to mess up the region. So can we come up with good principles and ideas, agree on them by consensus, maybe popularize them among the citizens, so that the citizens also, through their demand, which was talking about, can hold our leaders accountable. And they say, excuse me, you who is in power, if there is a military coup, no paying of taxes. We shall not pay taxes, whatever the case may be, and we shall refuse to pay taxes, and you have civil disturbance. So that these, because even in Europe, the leaders in power would want naturally, selfishly, to even have military coups and stay in power for a long time and whatever. But they know the citizens have become aware and conscious that they will not allow that abuse of power for political interests. You can even see it here in Uganda, how citizens are seated. We are here seated. You know, the Mabantu were taken, we are here seated. The people are just going around and mocking the whole legal system, and citizens are seated. So how can we build credible states when the citizens are not demanding, claiming their rights, but also based on ideas? We were supposed to have a national conference, a national dialogue, to first agree on certain ideas. He talked about meritocracy as number one. We would have meritocracy and stand on meritocracy. You appoint somebody outside the protocols. These days we talk about protocols or the rules and the procedures. We reject that person, whether he's a permanent secretary or a military leader. But we didn't agree on that. We don't have those ideas, and we don't stand for those ideas, so that we use those ideas as a basis upon which we shall resist anybody going against the agreed upon ideas. So civil society generally, by the way, the Sudan society, the Khartoum society, even if they are meeting pitfalls, they in the process, they are not a joke. The Khartoum group is not a joke. It has resisted these fellows, and something good can easily come out of that. The challenge is that is only Khartoum and Omdurman. But when you go in the countryside there, the professionals, the civil society
but you know, that
are not as active.
But it's as old as the 1950s. The uprisings in Sudan.
In Khartoum.
In Khartoum and Omdurman. Since 1958.
Yes, and you know, they are urbanized and they somehow conscious about their rights. Yeah. And although these fellows are killing them, you can see the resistance they have put up. It cannot easily be put up by these other banana republics around. So that consciousness needs to be uplifted.
What's surprising though, as you mentioned that, maybe why they have never been able to build a political vehicle because of the consciousness that clearly is exemplified by the manner in which they come on the streets and even overthrow regimes. Why every time they do that, power is hijacked is a question that needs to be studied.
One of them is that they are let down by the countryside. The Khartoum people.
Why haven't they mobilized
but you see, they would have mobilized even the countryside to build the vehicles, the political vehicles that could take power and be able to manage the country better.
The other contradictions where they have that contradiction of religion and race. They overlap and they hold them together. But nevertheless, they are an evolutionary trend upwards, especially those in Khartoum and Omdurman. They have resisted these fellas.
Looking at another issue that you raised, the consciousness of the populations, is also quite striking that most times in all those coups that we've talked about all over the continent, that most times when coups happen, people celebrate. What does that mean?
They don't celebrate the coming in of those. They celebrate
who is leaving.
Who is leaving.
Because, again, it's political failure. Because when you find a political elite who mismanage power, and then the levels of consciousness of the population is also still low, to the extent that they are not able to look at things beyond the immediate, then you face that kind of problem. Because you can talk about so many experiences of that nature. We can just talk about recent experiences. You can look at what was happening in Burkina Faso. Closest to us here, you can talk about a country like Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe, Mugabe had been there for donkey years. And, you know, people from the outside never knew that even his own army could overthrow him. But that happened. And people really had wanted Mugabe out. He had been rigging elections. But when Mnangagwa took over, it was like he was a new
Mugabe.
A new face. No, I mean, you could see the Zimbabweans on the tanks and, you know, celebrating. Within Harare. Celebrating the departure of Mugabe.
Yeah, maybe we can.
But not looking at the incoming, I mean, Mnangagwa, for all intents and purposes, was part of the Mugabe group.
Yeah. It was Mugabeism without Mugabe.
So you can see that the opposition parties at that time, the population wasn't looking at them as a manner of building for the long term. So there are political questions that we must address. As the elite, people who are educated in African countries, we really have shortcomings. There is a deficit in terms of, one, consciousness, two, in terms of skills, 3, in terms of even, putting the countries above our immediate needs. Until we are in a situation where the majority of the African elite in many countries are not able to manage the emotion of instant gratification, because it's what causes people to successfully manipulate the elite everywhere you see on this African continent. We are yet to see more and more of such issues happening. So we'll keep in a vicious cycle until you get a critical number of the elite, one who have the discipline, the foresight, the managerial skills to enable countries to break out of such vicious cycles.
All right, we are due for a short commercial break. Doctor, I'll begin with you after this. To the viewers, let's take a short commercial break, just get us off, I don't know, a bottle of water, a cup of tea, because there is so much knowledge being shared in this studio. But thank you for making a date with us. See you after this.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
We'll be back, our viewers, and we shall begin phase 2 right away. But before we do so, let me introduce a new panelist who has just joined us, and that is our well-known congressman, Mr. Joseph Ochieno, who is a UPC ideologue and also a media personality. Congressman Karibu.
Good to be here. I apologize for coming slightly late. I had other commitments, but also, the Kampala potholes. They can hold you back.
And we shall give you ample time.
They are now normal.
And Joseph, shall we give ample time? We have been, of course, trying to evaluate what is happening exactly in Sudan, but also trying to propose certain remedies therein. So let's just hear from you. What do you make of the conflict?
Extremely unfortunate. I must say that I was eavesdropping onto yourselves as we were having a conversation earlier. I think it is unfortunate. I was having a conversation with a few people the other day, and I think even partly with Sarah as a by-the-by, and we were saying that maybe, there is something happening in this region and part of North Africa. What is happening in Sudan could not happen in SADC now. But definitely it would not happen in ECOWAS, in West Africa, where until the other day, militarism and coups were partly known. At the moment in East Africa, who really is the good guy? It is shocking that these guys have turned around to become two competing guys, holding Sudan hostage. I know that Professor was hinting much earlier again that talking about the composition of the political class and civil society. Indeed, Sudanese civil society is amongst the most sophisticated in this region. And indeed, their political party is also substantially rooted. But it also happened to be a country which is substantially militarized, almost akin to that of Egypt. And for the various reasons, the military there with al-Bashir, who thought it was trying to equip himself akin to what's happening in Uganda, we ended up now with a Janjaweed militia, which is not only an army within an army, but an army that is now so solid, threatening the sovereignty of the Republic of Sudan. What is happening there? Why is it happening that these guys, after the coup, after the oust of al-Bashir, they came and actually played strategic polity with the uprising led predominantly by women, Sarah, at the time. And I know personalities within the opposition that went ahead and played these guys and joined hands with the military, hence allowing these people, when they were just about to eclipse to the complete revolution, meaning that the Bashir were going and all these military guys were going. There was a negotiation, and a particular section of the civil society, in fact, the political establishment, turned around and betrayed the rest. The hope then was that there would be some kind of a new formation that would include everyone else, including the military. And I know some of our colleagues there who were saying that, well, these things would come home to roost. Indeed, they did come. And coming to 2 years later, there was that coup within a coup. And where we are today, there is clearly the case that one faction does not want a return to civilian rule. The other are actually linked to al-Bashir. But of course, the broader context is part of what Grigor was talking about, meaning the fact that where we are now, there's an element of a stalemate. Problem is, where are the East African leaders? Problem is, where are the regional organizations? Problem is, where is the African Union? It's actually a shame that at this stage in the life of the continent, we are discussing with a country as powerful as Sudan, discussing not only a military coup, but as I say, two competing military forces holding a very sophisticated, very powerful nation state at hostage. Sudan at some stage, by releasing or letting go South Sudan, they thought actually they were beginning to start a new nation for themselves. But maybe the big quick lesson there is that at one stage, Darfur was seen to be part of a tiny little problem. Darfur created Hemeti, General Dagalog. But on the other hand, these guys, when they're actually beating, some people were beating South Sudanese, they thought maybe beat South Sudanese, get rid of them, and we shall have a new Sudan. It's not the case. When you have a system in which there's no democracy, when you have a system in which there's no rule of law, when you have a system in which people use the power of the military to entrench themselves like al-Bashir has done, these are the results that you get. But as I said, it's very unfortunate for that country.
Well, very good way to introduce yourself back to the conversation. Doctor, the United Nations at some point, I think 2005, championed a comprehensive peace agreement between the government of Sudan and another liberation movement. There are people who belong to the school of thought that think that there are certain external factors that are not exactly being portrayed out there, the interests of the West vis-a-vis that of the East, that are not really coming out very, very largely, but they're playing underground. I don't know. Do you think there could be more than meets the eye, that besides the conflict between these two groups, it could work in the interest of certain powers there to have a country as rich as Sudan to be in continuous conflict? I mean, the oil, all these minerals. That school of thought, is it substantiated or it is just hearsay?
You know, I want to use an example of our basic homesteads and neighborhoods. Everybody is interested in a peaceful neighborhood. If your neighbor is a habitual house beater, on the days they are fighting, you can't get sleep. We like hiding behind the West with sloganeering like imperialism to cover our weaknesses. And I really find it very unfortunate. People will always have interests. Sudan is not the richest country in the world. Even Africa, which is much endowed with the resources, natural resources, you know, the biggest and most energetic population of your generation, the biggest fresh waters. What do we have to show for that? That everybody must kill to partake of that. I think we need to take responsibility for our failures.
Yeah.
And stop hiding behind the West and accusing every issue. Why would the West be interested in Burhan and Dangar failing to agree on military rehabilitation to hand over to civilian rule? What do they have to benefit out of that confusion? So I think for me, it is a tired argument, running away from reality that I don't want to engage. Yeah, generally.
But the external interests are real.
They are real, but
they are real. Because there are those
they
who
take
don't,
advantage of your
who don't
confusion.
want stability in African countries because they want to keep on exploiting the resources cheaply. So the issue is not the external interest. The issue is we are all aware of that.
Why do we allow it to
So
happen?
why would we allow it to happen is the question.
Thank you, General. I want to state clearly that one, Sudan is not the richest natural endowed country in Africa. Part of it is a semi-desert. It has oil deposits. It has a bit of minerals. But they are richer countries. They are richer countries.
Which are also facing the same
No, I'm coming.
kind of issue.
Yeah, I'm coming. So when you fail to organize your act nationally, the West would do better trade with organized economies. They do better trade in South Africa. They do better trade in some countries. Ghana, unfortunately, the economy has collapsed. But Ghana has been doing better use of its resources. I get you, General. The West has interests.
Yes, there is
Legitimate interests. When you fail to organize, like DRC, then you have individuals who are now mostly being sanctioned. Individual conflict entrepreneurs who appear and show arms and arrest. For example, the independence of South Sudan. The businessman, Israeli businessman, who has just been sanctioned by Europe and the US, appeared on the eve of independence in a private jet, and with more than $30 million cash on his jet. I said, I have the money. I know. So so when you fail to get organized internally, you create room for illegal exploitation. If we are better organized, then we would engage in legitimate trade that develops Africa. And I think we should take primary responsibility for that. That's my point, General.
The actors, they may not necessarily even be countries. They might be business
individuals, yes.
But there are a significant number of interest groups.
They exploit
that
our
really
workforce.
would want to see Africa remain as
In chaos.
So all the political elite in Africa need to be aware of that. That's why it also requires skills. Because when you don't have a group that is skilled to ensure that they resolve internal contradictions in a manner that gives them stability, even before they make any confrontation with any external actor, if you don't build your rear to be strong, so that in case of any attempt for destabilization from the outside, that they will hit a brick wall, they will throw you out.
Yes, so it's like a question of, having earthquakes and a cracked house. So are you going to blame earthquakes? Or you need to build a strong foundation?
Look like there are clips now doing the rounds on social media about the gold mafia.
Yes. Yes, I know. The interests are real.
Yes.
But when you are disorganized, then you create room for exploitation.
But I want to add on. To add on here. You are talking about interests, and I'm not saying there are no external interests in hegemony. Yes. But quite often we have overemphasized interests as material gains, which is real. But we should also look at values of those foreign interests, of those foreign forces, sorry. Yes. There is the Arab world that is interested in having hegemony in Sudan because of their religious doctrines, which we must also look at.
But the fighters now are Arabs and Muslims.
No, they are Arabs and Muslims, but they are those forces which want to come in as mediators or have certain interests. Don't forget that those people might even be belonging to different factions of the same Islam. The other one, foreign interest.
That is true, yeah.
Yeah, maybe the
other foreign one is strategic. Strategic interests, which are not necessarily economic. There are forces which would want to have a presence in Sudan. Even that war on terror, there are those, the West, for example, would want to have a hegemony in Sudan because they would want to fight their Western or Christian versus Muslims, and Sudan is a frontier. There are those also interests. There are other strategic interests like For example, when you talk about these countries in the region like Uganda or Djibouti or whatever, the Western people may not necessarily be interested in the material things that they will benefit here, but as long as they can, for example, use Uganda to fight their wars in Somalia, they will be interested in Uganda. Or if the Anglophone world would want to fight the Francophone world in competition in having access to Congo, they can now use Uganda. For example, however much our President Museveni abuses the West, he has got a leverage over them. They know he's the one who has stopped the Islamic fundamentalism from proceeding from the north, because Uganda is at the frontier, to join those of Mozambique. They also know that if he was to get out of the picture, they will not have they will have pirates in Somalia. Remember in the last elections of 2016, was it 2016, I think? After those elections, the West was saying, you are not doing this, you are not doing this, you are not doing this. After the elections, I remember President Museveni addressed a press conference and said, by the way, we are withdrawing from Sudan, from Somalia. People said, hey, yeah, we are withdrawing. Why? Because we have not made much influence in the region, we have not impacted. Why should we be staying there anyway? So I am preparing to withdraw my troops. And then the West said, sorry. We are not going to talk about your elections again. Because of their strategic interest in the region, and he never withdrew the troops anyway. So when we are talking about foreign hegemony, let's not only over-concentrate on material economic interests, because that's almost what you are saying, that what is in Sudan in terms of economic resources, there is also strategic interest, but there is also a question of values, interests of the people in the Middle East, because the Middle East is also now a hegemonic power which is interested in Africa. If we are not careful, they are going to have a presence in Sudan, in Democratic Republic of Congo. The other day I heard there was a terrorist here in Eastern Congo. So there are hegemonic interests which are economic, and hegemonic interests which are value, and others which are strategic.
I agree. I think we all agree that they are interests.
Yeah.
The question is how our weaknesses
Poor factors. They are poor factors within here, which are bringing them here. We should remove them.
Yes.
Immunize ourselves.
So once you're not organized internally,
they will come.
You create room for everybody
we agree.
to do whatever. So we need to get organized.
Joseph, Russia is at the verge of signing an agreement with Sudan to construct a military base on Port Sudan, which is on the Red Sea, in exchange for military equipment from Russia. So speaking of foreign interests, I am not sure this would augur well. I am not sure that if this deal passed, America would be happy. So the idea of foreign interests is actually a reality, and it's here with us. But I don't know, what are your own words?
It's a reality that has already been discussed. I think part of what Sarah's emphasis was that, well, we know these are realities, but let's make sure that we organize and make sure that we check them. And part of what Gregory is saying is that actually the louder we realize these, the better, and perhaps, and maybe it's a challenge for us, political leaders, that we should be much more open, much more pragmatic, much more strategic, and actually also very direct in communicating many of these messages. You're absolutely right. In Sudan, as Professor says, this is something which went back up to the time of the Clintonite government in America. In fact, not only has Uganda suffered with these foreign interests as the underbelly of the Arab world going way back in the 60s, including seeing Idi Amin on this, because there's a practical reality, because yes, Amin was in part of that. But also on the other, this so-called war on terror, so the bombings in Sudan, where the Americans were very concerned that Islamist forces were entrenching themselves, establishing and entrenching themselves in Sudan.
Actually, at one time, Osama bin Laden was in Khartoum.
Precisely. And for them, as I said, while the Islamists elsewhere on the continent and parts of Asia are actually emotive Islamists, when it comes to Khartoum, there are one or two established political parties. They're actually Islamist political parties, and actually very, very deeply entrenched in, if you like, in the religious dogma, if you want to call it that way. So actually, the serious forces. So the Americans always wanted to check that. Right now, yes, the Russians are there, but right now also Egypt is backing the Sudan, which is part of always the traditional idea of where is Egypt, where is Saudi Arabia as the regional powers, and how is Israel overlooking from a distance. The Americans, as usual, meaning the West, particularly the Americans, will either be direct by engaging with the likes of the Musevenis or particular forces there, but perhaps they're usually much more smarter. The Americans will convey their messages via the Saudis, and maybe that's part of the areas where we sometimes actually fail, to recognize that we're being played around. So now, the new changes, particularly in Europe, post the war in Ukraine, means that there are huge realignments so that we cannot, perhaps at some stage while discussing this, leave it as a simplistically an internal conflict in Sudan. Yes, actually, General Hemeti, the bad name given to him, was a net force in the conflict in Yemen, and who at the moment is the one backing the established military state. So actually, part of the risks around this is that if it's not properly settled, it may actually see Sudan getting more fragmented than it possibly was with the SPLM. And that taking you back exactly to that geopolitical strategic question that you're raising, because I said, where is Egypt? Will Ethiopia look through, and why? What is the state of the Sudanese on border when the country becomes fragile, meaning particularly the sea border, which is actually linked directly with the question of the Suez, which is the most sensitive part. That includes one of the reasons why Museveni continues to be rewarded for having our men and women, fight for Americans in Somalia.
Geopolitics.
We are at a very, very the current times we are in as a people, as an African people, is quite challenging. First, I agree with what you are saying. When the body, even the human body, when the immunity
gives it,
is weak.
Yeah,
whatever opportunity.
Disease will attack you.
Will attack
That's
the
a good analogy.
It's like exactly the same thing.
Yeah. It attracts all nature of opportunistic diseases which will attack you.
Yes.
And if you have no way of reinforcing your immunity and you have a robust immune system again, you can easily die.
I think that's a
So
perfect analogy
the biggest danger we are in
interest.
now as Africa is that we are entering a phase in the global context where there is a realignment of forces.
Yes.
It's clear, it's so visible.
Yes. Almost standing
It's
to
been
the Cold
building
War.
up.
You
It's
could
not
always-
been caused by the war in Ukraine and Russia. That's not the cause. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has only triggered it to become almost,
much more apparent.
Very
a public spectacle in terms of how you see the realignment of forces. As that happens, it seems to me, again, as the African elite in playing out in different countries, we seem almost be unaware of the existential threat. Because we have a lot of resources that are needed elsewhere. The global economic powers which must keep having resources from, we have them,
Yes.
and they need them.
Yes. And if we are organized.
And then our
legitimate
political immune
threat.
systems are weak. And if we are not able to do whatever is necessary to rebuild those internal political immune systems within our countries, we can easily be redominated.
Yes.
And that's why.
Because all these global powers are looking at Africa as a source of not only mineral resources, we have got the highest percentage of unused arable land.
Land and fresh water.
Fresh water.
Yes.
2,
And strategic minerals.
and strategic minerals, yes.
Yes.
The rare earth, the, you know,
Uranium, name it.
uranium. But in the next 20, 30 years, African populations are going to reach 2.3 billion. Right now, much as we are 54 states, but the combined population is about 1.4 billion, thereabouts. By 2050, we are supposed to have hit about 2.3 billion. Is one of the youngest populations in terms of the comparison on a global scale. The land mass. China, Europe, United States, North America. You can feed them in Africa and there still be space. Every power, their economic power, will need to come into Africa because of exploiting all those kinds of opportunities. There is no free lunch. There is no society right now as we speak which has evolved to a level of consciousness where in their dealings with you, they'll be fair even when you are weak. We have not had a society which has developed that level yet. When you are weak, they'll take advantage of you. But here we are, most times, sucked into secondary contradictions in our different countries. And we seem to lack the capabilities to resolve the secondary contradictions so that we can concentrate on what brings us together to build ourselves to the extent that we can exploit our resources, build strong countries, build strong sub-regional units, and also a huge continent so that we can become equal partners in global affairs, economic, political, diplomatic. And that's the state of being that we are at now, globally.
Professor, Aspiration 6 of the African Youth Charter is about, the African Union Charter, the youth. Aspiration 6 is about silencing the guns. And I don't know, has Africa failed to silence its guns? More so when it comes to settling political disagreements.
I am going to respond.
And so what would it take for us to silence the guns?
Yes, I'm going to take, to continue with the analogy of immune system. So when you have challenges within yourself, you have to build immunity. If it fails, maybe you can use a vaccine. So, and you vaccinate yourself against those opportunistic diseases that are coming in. Now we are coming at the vaccination now to create a strong immunity. Now that immunity can be using the analogy, the political immunity, is that first of all, we must have ideas. We must have principled ideas and, on which we anchor ourselves. Europe managed to transform at a certain time at the turn of the 19th century, 18th century. They were preceded by the age of enlightenment. All these democratic ideas, which may have started in Greece or whatever, but they were clearly delineated and defined during the age of enlightenment. You know those philosophers. And gradually people imbued them. And so they stood on those ideas of creating an organized society and managing an organized society around what they call democracy, whatever name we would want to have it. To have strong states. Now, when I talk about strong states, some people will think that you must have a military power and coerce people into being together, bring them together. No, we are talking about soft power. At the same time, the other immunization, the other vaccine is to have good governance And among the principles and elements of good governance is equality. All these problems are emanating from unequal access to power, unequal access to resources. Resources is not only the land and the minerals. You are talking about education. You are talking about scholarships. You are talking about loans. You are talking about health. You are talking about justice. So, to immunize ourselves, the vaccine we need is we need to have good governance. General talked about meritocracy. Make sure that the Southeast Asia, which developed, even if they didn't have these free and fair elections, the elections, people have looked at elections as the only element of democracy. No! For them, good enough, they have got a long history of institutional setup. They already have had institutions established which immunized them against this onslaught from outside and confusion. Africa needs to immunize itself. By the way, you talked about lack of, that Africa has got these economic material resources. Africa also has people who are not immunized ideologically. That's why all these manner of extremists, whether they are from the West, the Christian, the right extremists, whether they are from the Middle East, all of them are going to play around and take advantage of us. You are going to find Shiites, you are going to find, which is the other group? Sunnis, you are going to find Christian right, Christian left, blah, blah, blah. Because we are a continent that is not anchored anywhere ideologically, they are struggling to capture our minds, and they will take advantage of that. Unless we have got ways and means of getting a vaccine and vaccines, but we are not given an opportunity to dialogue and come up with these ones in an equal way, inclusive way. We need to build an inclusive, equal, sustainable society and a strong state, not necessarily because you have the army to keep people together. For example, I'm going to give you some of the weaknesses of the states in Africa and Uganda inclusive. How many people trust that you go to a government hospital? If you have the means in Africa, you cannot go to a government hospital as your first choice. Look at who trusts Kampala City Council that it will do this or that. Who trusts our ministers that the ministers will not take Mabati? Who trusts our judicial system, our judicial systems? Who trusts our police? Who trusts this and that? So when you have lack of trust, then you have a weak state. And when you have a weak state that is not, a strong state is built on social solidarity of the people, of the citizens, and trust in you. And that will immunize us against these other sharks outside, these hawks which are waiting to take advantage of us, because there is a vacuum. There is a weakness of state, of running the state, and they will want to take our resources, material resources. They will also want to come and confuse us ideologically. And they did it, by the way, during the other Berlin Colonial Conference. They came here and confused us. If you go to these other countries which had some kind of immunization, Arab countries or India or Japan, they have Christians, but they don't use European names or Middle East names. They use their names because they had an immunization that immunized them against a full onslaught of the so-called civilizing mission. So Africa needs to rethink our relationships with the outsiders, but we need a good vaccine to immunize us. If we don't get a good vaccine, definitely these forces are coming to take advantage of our mineral resources, but also of our young generation's ideological minds. And they are going to take them.
Joseph, as we come towards the last 15 minutes of this conversation, is that how prepared is the region in terms of dealing with the possible refugee influx, but also the fate of the Sudanese civilian? Because where do they run? Because Ethiopia is in conflict, down here South Sudan itself is in conflict, Chad,
South Africa, Chad, Congo.
The entire neighborhood is in conflict. So Libya. So what's the fate of these people?
Tunisia.
I think, as I said earlier, it's actually quite a worrying situation. Friends from Sudanese Doctors Union have issued some statements this morning about the concern of the humanitarian situation in that country and threat for,
Very
you know, the challenges for refugees in the country. Also, the underreporting of casualties, both in death and injuries, and the lack of capacity for the, you know, emergency services. I think including the Red Cross to deal with the.
There's no passage. There's no right to passage.
And then, which is basically the next point Sarah raised, the fact that actually this is a battle between two extremely organized, extremely entrenched, extremely powerful, and extremely ruthless armies means that the Sudanese civilian is right in the middle. It's not like one of these other things where you see maybe one faction from an army attempts to seek to overthrow the government, or, you know, but these are two established powerful armies with the track records, and both of them don't have very good record at all. So it's a very serious situation for the Sudanese people. Number two, as I said, the worry is how much a genuine voice of intervention can arise from within the region, because it seems all have our interests. There would be possibly relatively neutral voices, voices that are too immaterial to matter. The voices that matter, we talked about interest, seem to be the voices that actually have interest, either supporting Dagalog on one hand, or the military regime itself on the other. So it's a real situation that we hope that there is broader intervention sooner to allow for a ceasefire and to allow for a possibility of a return to a conversation, whatever form it actually takes. It does not require, it does not need Sudan. This conflict cannot, should not be allowed to continue for another 10 days. Noting that particularly, although the Sudanese army controls the bigger mass land of Sudan, you know, the rebellious forces actually control a very substantial part of Sudan. So it's that serious. And there is no evidence that either sides are actually being kind, to the extent that even the question of a ceasefire yesterday, both sides are accusing the other of who broke the ceasefire, who did not break the ceasefire. But to the extent that you're fighting and you do not have any recourse for consideration for civilian authorities, it makes it a very, very terrible situation. But I was saying at the beginning that this is really sad, and it's a terrible indictment for the region, that I look around East Africa and I don't see, with the exception of one party state, Tanzania, any semblance of a government that is not only stable, but stable with the genuine mandate and confidence of the citizens, starting from Kenya across via to the hotbed of it here in Uganda, via Kinshasa to Rwanda, and so therefore to South Sudan. So it's a region in crisis. I was passing by a particular part of Kampala, and I was seeing a port without prejudice of Sudan, of refugees from Eritrea, and I was thinking about myself, you know, this without absolute prejudice. So it's a terrible thing for this region. The fact that we've ended up with a situation, as I said, I overheard you guys the first segment of this, a military intervention like this, where there is no genuine democratic intervention from within, means that it's very bad news for East Africa. Looking back to where we are, and me, an activist on these issues in the last 20 or so years, I did not know that post-apartheid. I did not know that post the Cold War. I did not know when the Musevenis were allegedly even attempting to put down military combat and put on suits and claim to want to become multi-party democratic, as it were, that we would have a situation today where, again, once again, army generals want to take over power, to rule militarily and very openly like this, because actually part of the conflict between the two is that one faction is saying that, no, we don't have enough time yet, you're rushing too much for us to go to civilian rule. What cheek, these guys, that they somehow they want to have monopoly over a rulership of a nation state. But as I said, the indictment was, El-Bashir was there. Sarah normally likes to talk about it. El-Bashir was there for a long time, and some people who were not directly being threatened thought they were okay, this is where we are. And that is why it's important that in this republic, that a situation in which we have Mr. Museveni, and after 40 years, there is his son moving around the Republic of Uganda using my fuel, going around the hills of up to and including Kabale the other day, latest, campaigning, talking politics, and a serving army officer using our money, and people going mute, and some people pretending to be handsome because they don't want to talk, I think is wrong. We are building impossibilities in this country, and the sooner we learn lessons that some of these things that happen down there could end up creating a stalemate in our republic, the better.
Well, our time is fast spent, but I'll give us 2 minutes each to give us your parting shots. And General, I'll begin with you as I move towards Professor.
Well, our hearts go out to the people of Sudan. One hopes that the two sides will see sense, cease fire, engage in discussions to reach a consensus on how they can resolve whatever contradiction they have without the use of arms, weapons, because the moment they continue slugging it out, there are going to be more people who are going to die. It seems both forces are well armed. It seems they have got external resources in terms of rearming, because there are many interest groups, it seems, outside a number of countries. If it's prolonged, it can also cause other regions which already had, which are, the peace in Sudan has really been very fragile. The integrity of Sudan is very, very fragile. So one hopes that that there will be no more escalation, and that there will be intervention from the regional bodies, IGAD, as well as maybe AU and the other international actors, to stabilize the situation, and hopefully once it's stable, then hopefully they can start re-engaging in terms of the transition process to, at some point, the civilian actors. Though, unfortunately, it seems, with this kind of conflict emerging, that may have just been pushed back to the sidelines. I hope down the road it will re-emerge, so they can be a stable Sudan and hopefully other countries in the region which are also unstable, so that we can exploit the resources that we have as countries, also as sub-regions and as a continent, and operate on the world scale, as on the world stage, as equal partners with the rest, because there is absolutely no reason why Africa would not have that potential that would enable it to be an equal partner in global affairs. But right now, in spite of all the resources that we have, we are just like on the periphery of what is going on on the global scale. I'd like to thank you, dear listeners.
Yes. Yes, sir.
No, I just want to ask for solidarity really with the Sudanese people, solidarity with the Sudanese trade unions, solidarity with the Sudanese Doctors Union, solidarity particularly with the very vulnerable who are predominantly Sudanese women at this material time. And to say that I want to hear, while I'm asking Mr. Museveni to learn lessons from his friend al-Bashir and the realities in Sudan, that I would like to hear his voice, since he actually occupies the #1 office of Uganda on our behalf, to take a position so that together they're able to compel a situation in which there's a cessation of hostilities. But #2, that actually I would like to see, whatever happens, that civilian authorities, the voice of civilian authorities, emerge as part of the settlement deal in Sudan. After all, that is actually what was clearly usurped. And then finally, that as already suggested, I think by Sarah, that it is still possible to do deals without bloodshed. So Anglo America, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all of whom actually have direct interests and actually competing partners with these guys, that actually we should remember that after African lives, and that in 200 years, my great-grandchildren will be coming back to look at these books and making the determination once we resolve ourselves. So the sooner these things are done in the interest of our peoples, your strategic material interests notwithstanding, actually the better. But for all particularly these two parties, notwithstanding whatever happened, including Darfur, don't forget ICC. Some people have got their own views about ICC, but no, you cannot run away from justice.
Fair enough. Yes, Doctor.
I think Africa needs to be intentional in building democracies or democratic nations. The path, maybe if you compare with the heaven and biblical teachings saying the going to heaven is like the path is narrow, but straightforward. The other one to hell is wide, but hot, and it derails development. So the dictatorship can be sweet, and it can serve narrow interests of a minor group of people. But in the long run, you set up everybody. You set up our countries in frames. If you look at the genesis of why Sudan is where it is, with Bashir and his repression, you curtail people's freedoms. The same thing happening in Uganda under President Museveni. He thinks he's the Alpha and Omega, and unless he writes to do this, to do that, the laws don't work. Then his family is above the law. The vulgarization of democracy is setting up our country in frames. Bashir came down under the sanctions, and he's generous. Magnitsky sanctions, ICC arrest warrant. That's part of the why Bashir was caught in the house, with money. He could not transact, not even on mobile money. We have two generals here, serving generals, with Magnitsky sanctions. We have a chain of military officials under visa bans, a build-up to Magnitsky sanctions because of human rights abuses and kidnaps. Then you have the vulgarization or the creation of what now is the Rapid Support Force in Sudan through General Moz and his tweeting politics and tours which are illegal and unconstitutional under the watch of his father. They are setting up our country in frames. They are setting us up for chaos. It won't take long if we continue on this path to find ourselves where Sudan is. For the people of Sudan, we are sorry. The humanitarian crisis is now beyond everybody's imagination. We have lives being slaughtered on the streets, in the buildings, some of the, houses being shelled, people losing shelter, and there is no passage for anybody to help. So my call is really that the generals, they should stop thinking that they should go up in flames and burn their countries just because you have the control of the gun. As for the international interests, nobody can exploit your country if you have genuine consensus, if you have genuine values, and if you respect one another as citizens of the same country. But once you build cocoons for selfish need, we all read the Panama Papers and arrest. Where are people rooting their countries and hiding money? How are they rooting their countries? The gold documentary exposed almost all presidents, including Uganda's, Sudan, Zimbabwe, name it, rooting their countries. So once we do not deal with that internally, I think we should stop blaming the other people who are also pushing the agenda. What is our agenda? Can we generate consensus and push our agenda as countries and block the opportunist vendors who come to do, whether it is moral, economic, or otherwise, they penetrate using our weaknesses.
Yes, Professor.
Thank you. I will end like this and say that the regional community, the international community, whether it is IGAD, whether it is AU, whether it is the Arab League, whether it is UN and other forces may have to come in at least to mitigate this immediate challenge that we are having in Sudan, because we could have a bloodbath, a genocide or something like that. However, after saying that, I think he talked about post-apartheid Africa. I think there is still apartheid in Africa, but in a different form. So it is that apartheid you find in Sudan of discriminating when it comes to resource allocation between ethnic groups, between religious groups, and between racial groups that is dividing that country. So we have to stop different forms of apartheid in our different states in the African continent. If we have to build a strong state immunized against these foreign forces and otherwise. Two, we have to avoid the shadow state, shadow government, shadow army. The immediate challenge that we have in Sudan as of now has been a result of Bashir creating the shadow army. And the shadow army, those army people, militia, want to take advantage of it. You've heard that the militia group now, this is under who?
Dagalog.
Dagalog. They are saying that, no, we don't want to be integrated in the army immediately. Why wouldn't anybody want to be integrated? The reason why they want to take 10 years is that they want to remain as a shadow army. And the shadow army cannot be held accountable.
And
so
they are not even trained properly.
So you take advantage of those 10 years to even root more and accumulate more and abuse the state. So they want to abuse the state. Ordinarily, I mean logically, if they have said, we want to integrate you tomorrow so that you become the part of the army, you get a salary, you get all those things from government, that would everybody would run to be there, but they are saying, no. For us, we want to take 10 years so that we remain a shadow state, a shadow army, a shadow government, and continue rooting without accountability, with impunity. Please, my advice to the whole African continent, if you have to build the states, sustainable societies, and good governance or sustainable governance or effective governance, we have to run away from this informal state, shadow government, shadow army, and go formal and have professional armies. This country of ours in Kenya, the way they are disorganized, ethnically, politically, whatever, what has sustained them the way they have been sustained is because they have got a professional army. And that professional army, by professional here I mean those who are not ready to intervene on one side or the other. So they have remained somehow neutral, and that's why Kenya is sustaining itself the way it has done. But if these other republics or banana republics around do not run away from the issue of a shadow state, a shadow government, a shadow army, we may have failed states or fragile states, and definitely foreign forces will take advantage and they will exploit us.
Wow, thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Congressman, and of course, General, thank you for making the time to be on this week's episode of the Citizens Chat Show. Well, to the viewers, it's always a pleasure having you every single Friday, and we hope that you've had a lovely show, but also enjoy your public holiday and enjoy your weekend. Next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.